So obviously, off the back of Nate Diaz fighting Jake Paul, I've actually looked into it, and there's been 7 high-profile MMA fighters from the UFC that have crossed over and fought in boxing, and neither one of them have actually been successful. So you can actually see on the graphic. Obviously, the most high-profile one was Conor McGregor when he fought Floyd Mayweather, and to be fair, he did do relatively well for his ability level. He did land a few punches, and he made it a little bit awkward for Mayweather. But I think Mayweather wanted to like prolong the fight so that there could potentially be a rematch in the future, so he can make more money. So I think if he wanted to, he could have stopped him in probably 2-3 rounds, maybe, if you really put it on him. But if you look on the actual thing, you can see that each fighter that's actually crossed over from MMA or UFC to boxing have not done well. So you can see Nate Diaz is the most latest one. He fought Jake Paul, and to be fair, even though he lost that fight against Jake Paul, I think he made a career high earning of 20 million. Obviously, Conor McGregor made like 100 million for his fight against Mayweather, which was his highest payday to date and it was way more than anything he ever made in MMA or the UFC. Ben Askren made a career high payday when he fought Jake Paul. Cowboy Cerrone, to be honest with you, I don't even know who Cowboy Cerrone fought. It wasn't too high profile, but I guess he made a decent payday. Tito Ortiz fought Anderson Silva. I think Frank Mir fought Evander Holyfield. Carlos Condit, I don't know who he fought. And Tyron Woodley, obviously twice he fought Jake Paul, and he made career high payday. So these MMA fighters, if you look at it from a career perspective, like crossing over, most of them are not successful. But the reason why they do it and they're willing to do it is to get that payday. And I'm just wondering, the one fighter that actually held his own and actually got the biggest win for MMA against boxing was Anderson Silva when he fought Chavez. Now Chavez, a lot of boxing fans do look at him like a joke, but they're putting him up against the pedestal of comparing him to his father, who was a Mexican legend who's one of the greatest Mexican fighters and one of the greatest fighters period to ever live. But if you look at it just from his losses before he fought Anderson Silva, he had respectable losses against opposition that was not bad. So obviously he lost to Sergio Martinez. Sergio Martinez is one of the greatest fighters of the last 25 years. He lost to, I can't remember all of his loss. I think he lost to Fonda and Fonfara, who's a decent fighter. So he didn't lose to bad opposition, to be fair. So I think that's probably the biggest win of MMA is Anderson Silva versus Chavez Jr. Obviously that was a big win, and I think Anderson Silva is the best fighter that's come from MMA to the world of boxing and done pretty well. And obviously he obviously beat I think he beat Tito Ortiz as well. So, yeah, generally speaking, I think Anderson Silva is the best. Now, what do I think of the chances of Francis Ngannou pulling off the upset against Fury? I don't think he's got a chance, but he's got a bigger chance than Conor McGregor has, because obviously he's got a punch and it's heavyweight boxing. And when two big men are trading leather, it only takes one punch to cause an upset because they're so big. But at the same time, I've noticed as well, fighters that are known to have a big punch in MMA, usually that doesn't transfer over to boxing. So Conor McGregor was known to have the left hand of death, but when he went over to boxing with them big gloves, it usually doesn't translate over. I mean, imagine if you had a puncher like Thomas Hearns or Golovkin or Gerald McKellen and he had UFC gloves on. I mean, the amount of damage they can do, it will be unprecedented. But not only that, they'll end up breaking their hand. So I think a lot of fighters that are very hard punchers in MMA, for example, Conor McGregor was known for his left hand. He knocked out Jose Aldo with it. They don't usually translate over to boxing. So the chances are, I don't think Francis Ngannou has got a chance, but just like the fighters that I mentioned before, he's going to get a career high payday, and this is why these MMA fighters do it. So tell me what you think about my assessment of this. I do usually think UFC fighters are usually terrible boxers, and I usually see memes where they say stuff like, "Oh, who is the best boxer in MMA? Is it Jorge Masvidal? Is it Dustin Poirier?" And I just shake my head because none of them are good boxers. Because when they actually do transfer over and try to go into boxing and try to get some success, apart from Anderson Silva, none of them have been able to do it. Most of them end up getting embarrassed. But to be fair, they do usually go up against top opposition. Like Conor McGregor went in there against Mayweather. Mayweather's probably the best fighter from the last 25 years, like pound for pound. Obviously, there's been other exceptions. Frank Mir went in there against Evander Holyfield. Tito Ortiz went in there against, again top level opposition. So like, generally they do usually fight really good fighters when they do it. So to some extent, I don't blame them, but at the same time, like it usually doesn't end up well for them. They usually don't tend to perform on the highest level when they do go in there against UFC fighters. So tell me what you think below. What do you think about my assessment? I generally don't think MMA fighters do that well when they cross over to boxing, and I think boxing is a very nuanced sport. I mean, when you look at it, it's just two men throwing punches. But when you actually try to do it, or if you try to actually train in it, there's a lot more nuance to it than what it looks like on um, on the outside looking in. There's a lot more technique to it. It does tend to look simple, like there's two fighters just throwing punches. And if you compare that to MMA, obviously MMA, you've got knees, you've got elbows, you've got Brazilian jiu-jitsu, you've got wrestling, you've got ground and pound, you've got submissions. It seems like MMA has got a lot more to it, but I feel like boxing is so specialized. When MMA fighters go into boxing, they think, it's easy to transfer over. It's really not. Boxing is an art, and it's an art that's been around for hundreds of years. So you're going in there against fighters that have literally been taught by trainers that have got decades of experience. Like MMA is a relatively new sport. Boxing has been around for years, so the nuanced training methods and just skills and techniques have been passed down for hundreds of years, and that's what makes boxing so nuanced and special and unique. You've got techniques that have been passed down for years. So that's my opinion. Tell me what you think about it. I think boxing is a lot harder than it looks. Trust me. Like MMA fights, they probably think I've got all these other skill sets that I'm focusing my attention on. How hard is it just to focus on punching? But when they go in there against a top level fighter, usually they find out it's not as easy as it looks. It may look easy from the outside looking in. You just got to throw a few punches, but when you actually go in there and fight someone who knows what they're doing, who knows how to feint, who knows how to set up punches, who knows how to dodge, who knows how distance control, feinting, punching, all of that, distance management, setting up punches from different angles, switching from head to body, changing levels, all of the nuances that go into boxing. It's a lot harder than it looks, and it's a skill that takes decades to master. For someone from MMA background to think that they could just go over to boxing and just dominate is an arrogance that only comes from not knowing the sport well enough. So tell me what you think below. Do MMA fighters usually suck when they go to boxing? I think they do. I think they underestimate how difficult it is. It's not as easy as it looks. Even boxers that have been around for years, that have gone through the amateur program, a lot of them never get to the top level in boxing because, like, even fighters like that have had great amateur careers, they a lot of them do not go to professional boxing and dominate the way they did in amateurs because it's such a difficult sport. So people that have trained in boxing for decades, they can't dominate. But someone who's got the arrogance of an MMA fighter that dominated in one sport, think that they can just transfer over and just dominate. Obviously, there's going to be an exception to the rule one day. One day there's going to be an MMA fighter that's dominated in MMA or whatever the leading MMA organization is at that time, whether it's the UFC or one championship, and they're going to transfer to boxing, and eventually they're going to win a real legit world title and beat a top fighter. But I think that's going to be something that happens. That's going to be like a phenomenon. It's not going to be something that's common. Like it's going to be like a once in a lifetime special type of fighter, a special fighter that's probably had a background in boxing in some type of way. I think it will happen eventually, but it's not it's going to be like a one in a million type of chance of that happening. I think Anderson Silva probably could have done that if he got into boxing a little bit younger. But tell me what you think below. Do you think what I'm saying is true, or do you think I'm overrating boxing? I think boxing is a nuanced skill, and it's not something that you can master in one or two fights. To have the arrogance to think that you can go in there against a top level boxer that's been doing it his entire life and dominated and completely won titles in multiple divisions or defended himself and beat the best fighters in the world in boxing, and you think you're just going to go in there and beat him. I think it's an arrogance, but at the same time, I don't blame MMA fights for doing it because from a financial perspective, even if they're going to get beat, they're going to make a lot more money, like 10 times, 20 times their payday that they're going to get in boxing than they would have got in MMA. So tell me what you think below. Do you think what I'm saying is true, or do you think there's not much nuance to it? I think generally UFC fighters don't do as well in boxing because they underestimate the skill of it, and there's much more skill. I'm not saying there's more skill in boxing than there is in the UFC. There's a tremendous amount of skill in not UFC, some MMA. There's a tremendous amount of skill in MMA, like knowing how to wrestle, knowing how to ground and pound, submitting opponents, all of that. There is skill in it, but boxing I think has got its own nuanced skill that's underestimated by most MMA fans and MMA fighters in general. So tell me what you think below, and like and subscribe to the channel. I've got a lot more content coming your way. Peace.